This is the Mobile Home Park Lawyer Podcast with Ferd Niemann. If you're looking to generate wealth and passive income in the lucrative world of mobile home parks, you're in the right place. You'll discover solutions to the common legal and operational pitfalls and how to optimize parks to maximize income. Your host is in the trenches. He's a real estate attorney, financial analyst, and mobile home park investor and operator. Now, let's turn it over to Ferd Niemann.
Welcome back, Mobile Home Park Nation. Ferd Niemann here again today with another episode of the Mobile Home Park Lawyer Podcast. Today, I've got another case study. It's been a minute since I did one of these, but I wanted to tell you about a deal. And this case study is on how to survive and how to hold on to a deal when nearly everything goes wrong. And in this case, fortunately, I was still able to make a little bit of money. Not as much money as I hoped for, to be honest. But, they don't all work out perfectly. There's some lessons learned here, some mistakes made probably, but also some bad luck and probably just some modifications for future assumptions or future diligence. So this is a deal here in Missouri that we bought it. Let me look at the closing statement here. We bought it, looks like early 2021, and we sold it in late 2023. So right about 22 months of ownership. The business plan on this was kind of like a lot of value add properties, repair the road, sub-meter water sewer, infill homes. We had about 10 infills to do. We had to renovate some homes, we had to demo some homes, paint some homes, remove the hitches and tongues, add some signage and decor. It was a small park, 36 sites. So it didn't have a ton of room for amenities. We did put in a small playground, small picnic area. We didn't do the covered shelter. We didn't do a dog park on this one. Didn't have room for a soccer field or a pickleball park or anything like that. But overall, it was a, very viable deal. But it didn't go as planned. So here's kind of how it went down. So part of this was, so my acquisitions guy had found this deal. It was actually our first deal. Well, one of a couple of first deals we worked on together that he'd already had in tow when we met. And he's under contract for $850, which I thought was crazy high. And he did too over time, after we got into diligence. And I wanted to retrade. And we told the seller we're going to retrade. And the seller said, no. It says in the contract specifically, and it did in this contract that I hadn't drafted, but somebody else had, but it said buyer agrees not to retrade the price. And he's like, it says it in there, like, okay, that's fine. But it also says buyer can drop the deal for any reason or no reason and get the earnest money back. So I said, consider this a drop deal. And you're dealing with me now because I'm the one that's going to get the loan and I'm the one that's going to put the money or raise the money. And I'm not buying it at $850. So that got pretty heated. Basically, I wanted to go between $550 and $600. And I finally agreed, okay, I'll do $600. And my colleague ended up stretching, and I didn't really approve this at first, stretched to $650. So I wasn't that jazzed about it. So I can count on one hand how many times I've been pressured into doing something that I'm not that comfortable with, or how many times I've gone against my gut, and it's less than 5. And it doesn't really work out that well. Not that I'm omniscient, but it seems to be a bad decision later in life. Now, I'll take some extreme ownership of this. I agreed. I later agreed. Okay, fine. That's what it's going to take. I agreed. I signed the note on the loan. I raised the money. I bought the deal. But what it meant was I was, 50,000 more pregnant on the deal than I would like to have been. So my cost basis was higher. But the deal still made sense, right? To one day do that. And eventually, we sold the deal for, just under about $1.8 million. I think it's $1.824 million, $1.840. So we made some money on it. But that's not all. We didn't make $1.2 million. We had LP equity in this deal, $650,000, because we also had a duplex that it came with, adjacent to the property. So we had a significant amount of money to also renovate the duplex. We ended up selling the duplex. It was a separately parceled piece of real estate. So we ended up selling it, pretty early on because the renovation was ridiculous. I mean, it was in really rough shape. It was boarded up, basement. You could just go in the basement. There were homeless people nearby. There was a trash receptacle right by it, which we got rid of a big dumpster. And there was, supposedly homeless people were behind there. Supposedly a guy was hiding there and pulled the gun on somebody, etc. So what went right? What went right was we were able to infill, and we were able to, get some new occupancy. We were able to increase rents. We were able to sub-meter water sewer, and nobody destroyed our amenities. So that was okay. What went wrong was cost overruns, and this would cost overruns on, you know, the concrete guy didn't measure the concrete quite perfectly. We didn't remeasure it for him. So instead of being 10 feet apart per state law, he was only like 9.5 feet apart. So we had to move the homes over. So we had to put a home in a second time. And then we had bad slope on some of the lots. So then the install guy said, based on the slope, the back is going to be on 5 blocks and the front's gonna be on 1 block, but that's too bad. So he needs to, jack because he had to jack it up 5 in the back. He then had a sewer slope issue and he wanted to put it underground. But then in order to do that, there was drainage issues. So then we had to put in French drains on some of the homes. And then because it was over 5 blocks, they failed inspection with the state and or city unless we put additional, tie downs or underpinnings on them, which cost additional money. And we had those sort of problems. And then we had the problems where the city inspector got difficult on, I don't really like how this deck is so tall, so I want you to add additional supports under the deck. And I don't really like that the deck lands on dirt or on paver stones. So now I want the walkway at the bottom of the deck to be concrete. And there's certain additional rounds of permits and so on. And hey, this lot's been vacant for X number of months. So now we need to upgrade the pedestals. Oh, now we're upgrading the pedestal. We need to also re-energize it, which also means we got to have an additional secondary pedestal to service these 4 homes. Oh, well, because now we have a new secondary pedestal, we have to service the existing 3 homes. We need to upgrade their primary pedestals, even though they're tenant-owned homes. So as you can tell, electrical was a problem here, and I'll get more into this. And then we brought a home in, and it was just underneath the power lines. The power line was not above it, but it was like above it and in front of it 2 feet. So it was pretty close. It wasn't touching the home. We didn't damage the power line. The city had, allowed previous homes to, be underneath the power lines. They allowed us to bring in previous homes nearby. But this time they decided new personnel, new policy, whatever. They decided the homes are too close to the power lines. So we need to put the power lines underground, which is a big to do, and lots of site plans and renderings and budgets and materials orders. And it was a huge expense. And it was not a miss price in our budget. It was a missed price. And those are more painful, meaning we budgeted 0 for power lines. And all of a sudden it's boom, 100 grand. And it's going to take time. It's going to cause delays. Well, now we have homes just sitting there. Well, now the home's been sitting there, can't be installed. Well, now one of them got vandalized. And because it had been vacant for so long, our insurance didn't cover vandalism coverage because it was essentially an attractive nuisance. Well, then we got to rewire the house. Well, then the guy starts rewiring the house. Well, then I didn't realize it, but the person had also ripped out part of the furnace. So my guy just fixes the furnace. Well, then we do an insurance claim on that portion because portions were covered, portions were not. But the portion on the furnace was no longer covered because we fixed it before we got photos of it. Then they only gave us a partial claim, and it just became a bigger nightmare. Well, then we're fighting them on the underground electric, and just so it turns out, they don't have the proper materials for the large transformer necessary to put the electric underground. So then we kind of get lucky, and then we get to keep the electric above ground. But they make us put it on 45-foot tall power poles instead of 20-foot power poles. So those take time, money, et cetera. They need weather heads and risers and all these other parts that, add to the cost. So it was cheaper than going underground, but we still had a significant non-budgeted item. So that stinks. But then the city decides a couple homes later, they want to be even more difficult. And they decide that in order to get these homes, have the electricity turned on, they need to do an inspection of the inside of the home. Okay, no big deal. I've been there, done that. Well, then they decide they need to do an inspection of every home in the park, including existing tenant-owned homes that are 50 years old. And then, of course, some of those required additional upgrades or maintenance. Now, fortunately, it wasn't as bad as that could have been. They were kind of lenient, surprisingly, on that piece. But we had to get inside these homes and so on. And some of them got red tagged until we did other stuff. So electrical was a big pain point. Now, could I have avoided this? I mean, here's what I did. My diligence, I saw the poles were old. I saw they were short, but I didn't want to specifically ask permission if I have to upgrade them because I figured if I asked, they would just say yes, and they were going to require it, and then I was gonna not be able to pay for the deal, and or I was going to retrade the seller, and he wasn't going to go for it because they'd been sitting there for 50 years and they'd been bringing homes in, no big deal. So the city had been basically okay with it. Well, we were like not that pleased with, a non-diligence maneuver there. So what did we do? We ended up going through the planning and zoning department and like, all right, are there any other codes, et cetera, relevant? And they gave us a good zoning letter saying we could do X, Y, and Z, bring in homes, demo homes, renovate the park, and it wouldn't trigger development or redevelopment or rezoning requirements. So we thought we were good. And we ended up talking to the permitting staff on the mobile home piece that works with the electrical piece. But the electrical department is a quasi city government agency. They're kind of in the city, but they kind of have their own department beyond just like a regular department. They have their own budget. They have their own even brand. It doesn't say like city of X. It's X city power department. Um, so turns out when one guy got promoted and another guy got moved off the job, they had a, quote, a change in practice. They insisted it wasn't a change in policy because they were always using the International Electric Code of whatever 1999 or something. So what that meant was it was always kind of record, so we didn't really have grandfathered rights. And you heard me say before, you can have your grandfathered rights trumped on three main occasions. One is nuisance. If you're deemed a nuisance, and they go through the statutory process. Two is quote, abandon your rights. And three is for the public health, safety, welfare, and morals, which is the police power of the government. Well, it's hard to argue that them requiring safer electrical connections was not for a good life safety initiative. So life safety, fire code, ingress, egress, floodplain, and electrical upgrades can be tough to overcome. And obviously, and especially because you don't want to budget just fixing all this stuff if it's not really in bad shape. And it's been like that forever, and they've been improving more homes. So should I have caught it? I mean, I did kind of catch it. It's on my due diligence checklist to look for power lines and to look at the pedestals and all that. They were working. They just weren't up to current code. And the city then called us on it and said it's not a grandfather right. And at that point, we were, it wasn't like it was a $500,000 expense. It was, 100. There was pain associated with it and delays, and we had more interest cost on the homes we brought in. We had 6 or 7 homes we brought in, and then we couldn't get them hooked up. It took like a year. So just sitting there. We're paying insurance, we're paying taxes, we're paying um, mortgage interest, and we're getting zero lot rent. And we're mowing the grass, of course, and all this. Luckily, nobody really vandalized them. One house got vandalized, and then some other Yahoo cut our water lines a couple times. So that was some of the other problems that came with this park. It was rough. And we actually extended our diligence in our closing. We required the seller to evict this one bad guy because we didn't want to be the guys that evicted him because we thought maybe he'd stab us. Because he was on Channel 9 as running a Cadillac converter theft ring, which I think also was a drug ring, was what was part of it. And because we went in there, he had like 10 cars and they were like chop shop looking, jacked up on rims, tinted windows, big like gang looking stickers in the windows and stuff for this guy's, automotive chop shop, or he didn't call it chop shop, automotive, custom vehicle stuff. So you could tell he had so many cars, like this is not a normal situation. So we made the seller go through the eviction, and the seller did. I later found out, by the way, the seller was a sex offender. I don't typically run background checks on the seller. I do on the tenants. I forgot. So my colleague partner told me later, yeah, I knew that because eventually we had to go get a check to him or get a check from him post closing, and we ended up finding his house. And then when we found his address, he came up on some list. So that's an aside. But there was a lot of bad actors in this park. There were some guys that were basically homeless. There was one guy that we demoed his home eventually after we evicted him, and it was like 6 45-yard dumpsters full of trash. That's way too much for a home. A home is typically 1 to 2, but it had so much crap in the home, floor to ceiling. He didn't have a bed or a couch. He just apparently just slept like up against a pile of crap. And under the home, The entire underbelly of the home was full of stuff. I mean, just luggage, boxes, tools, toys, everything you imagine. Hit a motorcycle in his bedroom. I mean, there wasn't even the back door went to a bedroom, and there wasn't even steps to it. He apparently got like a ramp and pushed his motorcycle up there, and it was just laying in the bedroom. So this guy was a little odd, a little crazy. So we had people like that. We had residents that um, would residents for guests that would walk down the street naked at broad daylight and take a crap right in the middle of the street. There was a lot of drugs apparently. Um, we had another guy that claimed during my diligence. This guy told me straight up, there's tons of violence out here, and he said I've had to pull my gun out numerous times and shoot some of these crazy druggies. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I called the police and I said, can I get a police report, which is part of our diligence process? And they said, there's been no crimes or even phone calls to the police in like 3 years in that park. So I went back to this guy, knocked on his door. And this guy sat outside. He didn't wear a shirt. He was hundreds and hundreds of pounds. He just sat there with his belly hanging out. And I'm like, hey, man, you said you've fired your gun numerous occasions and you see all this violence. And another guy said he got a gun pulled on him at the trash receptacle. And I said, I called the police. They said it's not true. Are you just bluffing or messing with me? And he said, I'm not messing with you. The police are lying about crime. They know there's crime. He said, but I don't doubt that there's no police calls because nobody around here is going to call the police. We just take care of it ourselves. I really didn't believe him. Probably should have believed him more. Particularly, we had another house full of druggies that we found out. We go behind the home. This is after we didn't catch it during diligence, but after a while, we find out. We go behind the home. They have their house plugged in to the neighbor's house for electricity. It turns out they had not had power in their name for over 2 years. And we cut the power. I mean, we literally just cut the extension cord. Like, what do they do? Call the police that we cut the extension cord from their illegal theft of one of our home's electricity. And they didn't plug it back in. They didn't do anything. They just lived there. And there were like 12 adults living in this home. And I remember being there, and it's a metal home, and it was 100 degrees out. And they have no power. And they were just sitting in that home. The windows were open, doors open, but they had to be sweating in a metal home with minimal uh, airflow. It had to be 115 degrees in there, and they just sat there all day. Like, no one would really do that on purpose, or could even probably withstand that unless you were on drugs. We had a maintenance guy. Luckily, he didn't work for us at this time, but he'd worked for us, and he came out of prison. We knew he did, but years earlier, and he seemed like a nice guy. Bad, apparently a bad judge of character, and we had tattoos all over his body, and he looked really scary, really muscular guy. So I said, you can work for us, but you got to wear a shirt. And you can paint a house or do a deck. We didn't let him in houses that were occupied. Not that we, wouldn't necessarily, but we didn't. He's a great worker. Did great renovations, like a true carpenter. And he's been out of trouble. And he's like, hey, my life's clean, all this. Well, he quit one day, just ghosted us. And I was out the park like 3, 4, 5 months later, and I saw him. I'm like, hey, man, what happened? He goes, I got a job at the factory making $20 an hour. You're paying me 18. I said, I'll pay you 20. You were skilled. I just, he goes, okay. Well, I told the guy I work, this is a Friday morning. He said, I told the guy I work this afternoon, night shift, and I got to work Saturday, but I can start you on Monday. I said, deal. He goes, I'm going to honor my commitment. I told him I'd work 2 shifts. Deal. Shook his hand, gave him a $2 raise, said, start on Monday, work with the manager. That weekend, he stabbed his pregnant girlfriend 38 times, killed the baby, and blinded her, stabbed her in both eyeballs, and put her in a coma, and she lived. Thank God she lived. He went to jail. He found some lawyer to defend him and say that he didn't do it. Pretty sure he was convicted, though. He apparently put drugs down her throat and then drug her by her hair and stabbed her. So, as you can tell, this deal didn't go that well because some of the people there were really challenging and really rough. But through it all, we had some good maintenance guys come around. We had some good managers coming around. We got some good applicants, some good residents, and we turned the park around. And we renovated some homes, demoed a couple homes, cut down a bunch of trees. So that was another thing. The electrical lines that we had to increase required more trees being cut down. We also had a stormwater detention. It wasn't even our property. It was an easement going to a city stormwater main. There was an exterior stormwater. It was just like basically a ditch or a creek. Well, it had a big culvert pipe that was like 6 feet in diameter. Apparently, it got filled with bikes and chairs and sticks and tires and stuff, and it got clogged, and then the water overflowed. It created a flood that basically flooded one and a half of our lots, which then caused the foundation of one of our homes to erode away. And then the home started falling off the blocks. And we had to put in new concrete, put in new dirt, resettle it. Luckily, I had this guy working for me that was fearless, former Mexican Special Forces guy that guy was tough as can be. Um, he went in there, cleaned all that crap out, and caught snakes and raccoons, with his bare hands and threw them away and got bit at and chased and just didn't just sucked it up and did it. So we got the flooding issue resolved. Got the city off our back on that. So that was that was a little bit of a scare. We were able to sell the duplex, and I was able to record an easement and access and rules easement that basically was our park rules, which gave me some control over the quality of the home next door post sale. We also had a sub meter. The main meter, the city changed our meter so we estimated water at X. Well, then what do you know? Once we changed ownership, they put a new meter on and water started being 2X. So then we had leaks and all that. We had to fix leaks. We had frozen pipes like you cannot believe because we didn't realize. I didn't check under the underbellies of tenant-owned homes during our diligence. Never thought of it, to be honest. Well, tenant-owned homes freeze also, and none of these people had heat tape or insulation. And this was in winter of 21 where it got like polar vortex. And I remember being out there on Valentine's Day. And it was like minus 25 degrees. And our kerosene heaters, our space heaters, were freezing because apparently kerosene and or diesel, I think we're using diesel fuel because there was a national shortage on kerosene at the time. So we put diesel fuel in there, which also works. I didn't realize this. Truck drivers probably do, right? They know this more than me, but diesel will freeze. Gasoline freezes when it gets so cold and it turns into like a jelly. So then our heaters wouldn't work. So we ended up having to get some thinner that like solves the jelly piece. But that was a big pain. So we ended up having to replace the water lines under almost every single home because apparently, like, I asked the residents, I went in the guy's house, the big fat guy, I said, hey, what did you guys do last year? I mean, it freezes every year. It wasn't as bad as this year. What did you guys do last year and year before? They said, well, we just, you just poop or pee until the toilet's full because the sewer was frozen too. Because it just freezes and then when it, 2 or 3 days later, it goes down. And for water, for drinking, well, we just buy a bottle of water. And for showering, well, we just don't shower for a few days. And that's how the old landlord never did anything. I couldn't believe it. And I was like, well, we're going to take care of it. But it was pretty tough to defrost an entire home, when it was that cold out. So we basically had to, cut their lines, add new PEX lines, and replumb 10 houses or 20 houses, how many it was. So that was a big pain in the butt. If they were tenant-owned homes, we generally would bill them back. Some of these were park-owned homes, and they had new lines, but they weren't insulated properly. We closed in January, and we were supposed to close in like October, November. But we pushed it back because of the Cadillac converter guy. So we had a long diligence and we kind of missed the winter season. We didn't do extra prep. We should have. And we closed and like boom, right when we close, it's really cold. So that's kind of why I don't like this is like the horror story where I don't like to close in December, January. I try to string it out, either close faster or so we can prep the home for winter or string it out and miss the winter. So those are some of the challenges we had, just a few, right? But we ended up getting it done. A broker brought me an offer off market. And I really, in order to make money on this deal, I had to sell it at what I thought was an inflated price. Well, I was like, I'm not going to do that right now. So I wasn't going to sell it yet, even though I was plenty tired of the deal. We also had some home problems with the manufacturer sent us homes and sent them to the wrong parks. We had title issues. We had some challenges with one of the state installers had two different state installers installing homes, and one of them was kind of cutting corners, apparently. So the other guy turned him in. I mean, it was kind of crazy. So then now we're like dealing with their fight. We had a resident he was illiterate, which, it sucks. And I'm sure it's a hard life and all that. but because he's literate, he was really grumpy, and because we'd put a notice on his door about you owe this much rent, because previously water was free. Well, we sub-metered water and we started billing him for it. Well, he didn't know that because he couldn't read. Well, he was a super nice guy when he was sober, and he was a mechanic. But then he'd come home from work and he would drink, and he would drink a lot. And then he was a super cranky guy, and he had these two crazy dogs and big dogs, and we told him you can't have dogs outside, and he goes, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, it's in your lease, and we put a notice on your door." He goes, "Well, I can't read," and he really couldn't. So somebody else read it to him, and he at one point pulled out a gun, and we weren't there. The manager wasn't there, luckily, but a resident called the police, and he had a standoff with the police at gunpoint. Luckily, no shots were fired. He was arrested, and then he literally brought his home in on his own before we bought the park with like an F-250 and installed it. So he was going to pull it out. He didn't, but then he jumped town and ripped all the wiring out, destroyed the home, and we got left the shell of a home. So that was another problem. So anyway, there were lots of challenges, but we ended up getting the occupancy up, getting the park turned around. Got rid of the bad apples, got in some good families, some good older people. Oh, we had another older guy. Oh man, I forgot about this. This older guy at one of the homes. He was kind of we thought he was on drugs, but I don't think he was. He actually was. I think he used to be on drugs, and his brain was kind of fried. But he didn't do drugs currently. But he had befriended some of these guys, and supposedly this guy was like 80 years old. So his like 60-year-old children said that he was being taken advantage of by these homeless people. They were druggies. And we're like, okay, well, what are we supposed to do about it? And apparently they said they would break in at night and they would tie him up and beat him up. And then they would steal all his food and groceries. And they'd come back the next week or month when he bought more food, which seemed unbelievable. And he was like hanging out with them. He seemed like kind of a bad actor too. He'd have friends show up with trailers full of stolen materials and stuff that they would try to sell, including from their yard. Like let's sell stolen stuff. So we don't really believe it. Eventually, his children took him from the park because they put him in a senior center. They're like, we need to protect him. Well, then we got access to the home, and sure enough, somebody had cut a hole in the floor in the kitchen, and they had a rug over it and a piece of plywood, and they were coming in through the floor at night and breaking in this guy's home to then beat him up and take advantage of him. I mean, it's unreal. But ultimately, I had about occupied, I think 32 out of 36. We started at roughly I think like 24 or something like that. We had a demo 3 or 4 also. So maybe brought in about 10 homes. And in order to get profitable, I personally had to front like 200 grand of cost overruns for all this crap in order to, keep the deal on float. We were still paying the pref. We were still paying them. We didn't have to cap call. We didn't cap call the investors. I just lent the money to the project. And then, but I needed to get like 2 more occupied in order to make it profitable based on all of our cost overruns. And ultimately, off-market broker brought us a deal, and I said, "Look, here's my price." And it seemed that's unreasonable. I said, "I know it's a little unreasonable, but there were some nice homes involved, so the price was higher than you would think for the park because we had some nice homes we brought in, brand new homes, so those had some real value and all that." And I said, "Look, I'm going to fill it up. It's going to take me a little more time, but then I'm going to get it and I'm going to make some money. But if you want to pay me half of that upside now, essentially, I'll sell it now and I'll finish the work and I'll be done with the park." And they said, "Deal." And they closed. And they were honorable and they did their diligence. And I disclosed everything, that was relevant. I mean, I told them about even the stabbing, and the woman still lived in our park, but she was under some sort of protective order for a while until the guy was convicted. Um, so I mean, I disclosed all that, and they closed, and we ended up making a little money. Economically, this is the worst deal we had. IRR to our investors was 10.6%. Not ideal. And then part of the reason it was that strong was we kept paying the 8 pref current. So it kept their IRR, pretty strong. But if I'm looking here at my pro forma, we estimated that the IRR to the investors was going to be like 22%. And that's net, net of our fees. And that was at the time, that was pretty conservative assumptions. Didn't work out like that. All right. It just didn't. But we got out of the deal. Lots of lessons learned. I'm pleased to say our best deal. We still got a return of 100% of the LP capital. We still paid the pref current from jump. We made a double-digit IRR. Equity multiple was like 1.28, 1.3. we basically doubled the NOI through infill and rent raises and cost savings. The problem is we just had a lot of cost overruns because it took us a lot longer to get there. So we had to eat a lot of interest, a lot of insurance. And then we had, that plethora of issues that I just mentioned. We had to also reduce some supply lines of the sewers. People were messing with them. We had some of that we knew through our diligence, that people had thrown rocks and dirt and stuff down the sewer lines. So in hindsight, one of the key lessons learned is not to discriminate against your clientele, but really look into hard the criminal and homelessness and drug history of the property. Because if it has all that, it's really tough to turn around. We were able to do it. So that's rewarding that we were able to, turn this into a really rough neighborhood to a decent neighborhood. And we had a family up front that was really nice. And we asked them to be our park greeter. And they said, we don't go in the back half of the park. It's not safe. That's what they said at the beginning. And we got rid of some of those bad apples and we solved some of those problems. So I'm happy. They were really great residents. They actually put up Christmas decorations and Halloween decorations and stuff, and they mowed the front common area and they planted a garden and stuff, like all for free. They're like, hey, can we do this? I'm like, yeah, go ahead. So they were true, all-American folks. So it feels good to save it for them, but it was a challenge. Be honest. I got a lot of gray hair on it. Lost some staff over it that were afraid to go to the park or didn't want to put in the effort to go to the park. Lost one of our partners over the deal. There were some safety risks, no doubt. Thanks be to God, got it done, fixed the park, made a little bit of money. Didn't get stabbed personally. Unfortunately, one woman really did. But long story short, you can still hold on. You can still make it work, even if it seems like everything goes wrong. And one thing I'm grateful for is more could have gone wrong. It didn't, right? The city could have made us upgrade the electrical on the other side of the street, which is part of the reason we complied, by the way, with some of their other requests. Is this is bureaucrat at its finest. The guy looked at me and said, I'm facing north. I just told you we had to fix all of the electrical stuff on the north side of the street. There are more homes on the south side of the street. I wonder if those homes need repairs. I wonder if those power lines need to be elevated. Would you like me to turn around? I said, no, sir, of course not. And you know what? This is so dumb. They never made us upgrade the south side of the street. So what was the point of doing it on the north side? Supposedly for the life safety of some, lower income people? If that's true, why would you not make us do it on both sides of the street? It's 20 feet apart. I wasn't going to fight that fight. That somebody hit a telephone pole actually and broke a pole. So the week of closing, I had to come out of pocket $15,000 to fix the electrical pole and do another upgrade. And at this point, it was coming out of my pocket because I had a disposition fee built into the deal, but there wasn't enough money to pay the full disposition fee and give the LPs all their money back into proper return. So I cut my fee in order to make sure we took care of the LPs. So it literally can't cost me thousands of dollars. But hey, it's only money. My dad says, if you can write a check to make the problem go away, it's not that big a problem. Your wife gets cancer, that's a problem. You got to spend $100,000 on a trailer park. It's an inconvenience and it's an expense, but as long as you got the money, which I realize money's finite. I don't have an infinite amount myself, right? But if you can write a check, make it go away, it ain't that big a problem. And that's what we're able to do. You saved it, saved the deal. End of story. Thanks and God bless.
You've been listening to the Mobile Home Park Lawyer Podcast with Ferd Niemann. Ready to learn more? Go to www.themobilehomelawyer.com for free resources and materials to help you succeed. If you love the podcast, go to Apple Podcasts, give us your review, and subscribe today. Thank you for listening. Neither the Supreme Court of Missouri nor the Missouri Bar reviews nor approves certifying organizations or specialist designations. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertisements.